I'd like to call the Board of Administration meeting to order, and the first order of business is roll call, please.
Good morning. Henry Jones.
Here.
Theresa Taylor.
Here.
Margaret Brown. Here. Rob Fechner. Frank Rufino for Treasurer Ma. Lisa Middleton.
Present.
David Miller.
Here.
Stacy Oliveris.
Here.
Irena Ortega. Here. Jason Perez. Mona Pascal Rogers. Here. Ramon Rubacava. Here. And Karen Green-Ross for Betty Yee.
Okay, thank you very much. The next item is approval of the time agenda. Do I have a motion? Moved by Mrs. Taylor, second by Mr. Miller. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item passes. The next item is Pledge of Allegiance, and I've asked Mr. Fechner to lead us in the pledge. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item on the agenda is the President's report. So good morning again. This week we welcomed a new member to our board, Stacy Oliveris. And on behalf of the entire board, I want to thank you and take this opportunity to officially welcome you to our CalPERS family. Ms. Oliveira's experience in the areas of finance, economics, and technology will be an asset to our board. We look forward to her perspectives as a public and private sector leader and to her contributions to help ensure the long-term sustainability of pensions and health care for those who we serve. I'd like to begin this morning also by taking a moment of personal privilege. Last night, Capital Weekly, a local publication that covers California governments and politics, released its annual top 100 list of people that wield decisive influence on California politics and policy. I'm pleased to share that our CEO, Marcy Frost, is part of that list. Congratulations. Capital Weekly called Marcy one of the most important women in California. So congratulations, Marcy. Being named to this list is a testament to the work that she has been doing to tell CalPERS' story on behalf of our members and our employers. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, I went to visit a retiree group in Santa Cruz to update them on CalPERS' status. And as I was in that area, I decided to visit the San Jose regional office and to just personally meet them and thank them for the work that they do. And while I was there, Kevin Kaufman, who is the manager there, shared a story with me that I think is a testament to how we serve our members. He shared with me that we had a member that lives in San Diego, was driving from San Diego to Oregon for a vacation. And so they visit some friends in San Jose, and they say, oh, we got a regional office here, let's stop in. So they stopped in, and they talked to one of the representatives, and when he left, he had retired. So it tells you. So I thought that was pretty amazing that you're on your way to a vacation and you retire in the process. So that's very good. Let me close by thanking my colleagues for the insightful and constructive dialogue we had yesterday afternoon on our board governance work streams. We started down this path nearly 13 months ago with the goal of assessing our strengths and identifying opportunities for us to enhance governance, effectiveness, and performance as a governing body. Many ideas emerged from this work and the findings of our survey. These are rough issues, but we do not avoid them. We deal with them. CalPERS needs to innovate to keep pace with the challenges we face. That is not easy, but it is necessary. And our members expect that we move with times and walk the talk. What we have before us today is a solid set of recommendations. I want to thank the workstream leads for taking on this important work and driving us forward. It is critical for this work to be driven by the board, for the board. I also want to thank Carrie Dominguez from NACD and our resident expert of governance, Ann Simpson. Carrie and Ann have guided our efforts and made sure our work reflected best practices in corporate governance. What unites us as a board is our fiduciary duty to our members. They deserve the best from us, and that includes governance. As I mentioned yesterday in our committee meeting, new research from Boston College shows that public pension funds with governance have the best performance. As board president, I'm proud that we have taken up this challenge of improving our governance, raising the bar for ourselves so we can perform to the very best of our ability. We have more work to do, but I'm optimistic that we are on the right path. So with that, I'll turn it over to our CEO, Marcy Frost.
Good morning, President Jones and members of the board. I'd like to start this morning's report by saying thank you to all of you who participated in the ice cream social yesterday. That's always a very fun event for the team, and I think the executive team as well as the board enjoys interacting with the team here at CalPERS. It has become a very nice tradition here. I think when I first started back in August of 2016, I think the temperature was 105 that day, and so yesterday was a nice relief. But I also think it's an opportunity that our colleagues from around CalPERS have not only an opportunity to interact more directly with the executive team, but it's a wonderful opportunity for them to get to interact with you and get to know you as well. Our members are really at the heart of everything that we do here at CalPERS, and I think as you've been out and around talking with members or attending some of the CBs that we do around the state, you continue to hear from our members their concern about the safety of their benefits. And will the benefits be there if they're not retired yet? Will the benefits be there when they need them to be? So one of the things that we've done to try and tell the story and explain the work that CalPERS is doing is we issued a letter. It's out on our website, and it's a letter from me to our members so that they can understand the plan that we've developed over the future. But it also gives a little bit of a look back, a 20-year look back, if you will, on the funded status today being at 71%. And it was not that long ago that we would have been considered super funded. So what happened between being a super funded plan to being where we're at today at roughly 71%? And I think as we're out talking not only with members, but as we're talking with employers as well, that is a question that we continue to get. Why does the fund remain at 71%? So we've been able to get this letter together. We're sharing it with our members. We're certainly sharing it with the employers who we meet with on a regular basis so that they can understand what we're trying to prevent is, when we first started having the dialogue with the employers, there tended to be a lot of, well, whose fault is it? And so what we're trying to do is say, we have a problem to solve. It's not a matter of anyone's fault, but there is a problem to solve, and it's going to take everyone working together to solve it, and it's a long-term solution. This is not an overnight fix. It wasn't an overnight problem that got us where we're at today, and it's certainly not an overnight fix to get us back to a healthier funded status, but that everyone is focused on it, including the entire executive team as well as the board. So we have copies of the letter in the back of the auditorium for anyone who might be interested in reading it, but as I indicated, it's also out on our website, available to any member or anyone who wants to go and take a look. So, and then on Tuesday, we were very fortunate to hear from Hiro Mizuno from GPIF in Japan, and I think his talk was very well received, not only from the board, but also from people sitting in the auditorium. And I think his perspective as an executive director and a CIO of the world's largest public pension fund, combined with his experience in private equity markets, was really invaluable. And you can see, at least in my opinion, you see some similarities between our own CIO, Ben Meng, and Hiro. And as you learned, Hiro is faced with some of the very same challenges that we have here at CalPERS and is taking some of the approaches that we're taking. And a few takeaways for me were the alignment of interests and the way that he's been able to negotiate fee structures with outside asset managers, which they're required to use. And I think he really talked to us about transparency, that transparency really works both ways. Transparency has to happen to have public trust and trust in the system, but you also have to be careful about transparency, that it does not impair your ability to make an investment return. So that is the balance that we continue to try and strike, and obviously we'll continue to focus there as well. We also had another investment workshop with the CFA Institute. This is the fourth one for the year, and this one was really around global equity and public markets. Also of note this week was the discussion we had on mental health, and we do know that we'll have more discussions coming up in the November Pension and Health Benefits Committee, and we will be inviting the health plans, or at least one or two of the health plans, to talk about not only the pipeline, but the resources available to help our members in the system. And I think it's important, and Dr. Logan emphasized this, it's important for us to understand that mental health is one of the root causes of the violence that we continue to see around this nation. And we know that there's much more work to be done to get people who live with mental illness the help that they need. And I do appreciate Controller Yee and Treasurer Ma's letters to me, and we'll continue to address those questions. I know we will also be looking at the surveys that we send out to the members on how well they believe that those services have met their needs, and the possibility of customizing additional questions to get more input from the members who are receiving these services. And then we also welcomed Dr. Molds to join the team as the Chief Health Director. So he was available and is here today as well. And I'm confident that his experience working on healthcare policy around the nation, as well as in the state of California, will really help to move our emphasis on public policy around healthcare, both with cost containment and high quality and access. Moving on now to some emergency preparedness work that we're doing internally at CalPERS. In addition to learning about our role in improving mental health outcomes, it's important that we also take practical steps here at CalPERS to prepare for emergency scenarios such as an active shooter scenario. And employee and member safety on our campus obviously is our top priority. And that's why the executive team and our senior leadership council recently met with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to learn what we can do to become better prepared. And then tomorrow, we'll be offering similar training to all of our employees here. And in November, we actually will be holding an active shooter training drill that will provide us valuable understanding should we ever have to respond to an event such as that. In a little while, you'll be receiving a legislative update from Danny Brown, and there will be a bill up for action, which is 731. We will have someone from the healthcare team available to address any specific questions you may have there. You'll also hear shortly about our stakeholder perception survey. This is a survey we send out every year to our members, to our retirees, employers, and other stakeholder groups to get a check on the effectiveness of our communication and outreach efforts. Overall, we did see a continued upward trend in most categories, especially in the area of confidence in retirement, money being safe, which is, I think, really an important indicator and one our members certainly want us to pay attention to. And as you know, this has been a focus of ours and yours when we're out speaking to a number of groups. I also recently visited with officials in the county of Riverside, and they had made a request for us to come and meet with them to talk about some of their concerns, but also address several questions that they had. So our team, along with board members Lisa Middleton and Jason Perez, traveled to their office just a few weeks ago to listen to those concerns. And I think it was a productive meeting. I would invite Ms. Middleton or Mr. Perez to comment on this as well. But I think they came away with a good impression of the actions that we are taking and that we are focused on the right things, meaning not only are we focused on the members' benefit, but we're also focused on the employer's ability to pay for them. And, you know, for our part, every time we have one of these meetings with the employer community or with the member community, we do take away a bit of information that we come back and figure out how do we communicate this topic better so that it saturates within the membership a little more strongly than it is today. And then I also just returned from the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, which is a group of all of the heads of the public pension plans around the United States. And it's always good to be there to talk about the work that CalPERS is doing. They do a roll call of the states where each state talks about, for 3 minutes, basically the top issues facing their fund and any best practices that they want to talk about. I did speak about the governance work that the board had decided to take as their priority for this year, and there is a lot of interest to understanding the outcome of the meeting yesterday and today, so I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to talk about that with them. And then earlier this month, I met with the mayor of Sacramento and the leaders of the Greater Sacramento Economic Council, and I believe we have someone from that council here to give public comment today. And this really is just part of our ongoing effort to connect with leaders in California's business community. And the discussion gave me a chance to talk about the impact our benefits really have on the California economy, considering over $20 billion in benefits is being paid and typically spent in the state of California. And then one more outreach item to mention, and that's our annual education forum. Currently, we have nearly 800 participants registered to attend this 20th annual event. And this year, it will be held at the Oakland Marriott City Center, October 28th through October 30th. And we've put together about 45 educational sessions, plus a host of exhibit hall, informational booths, and one-on-one consultations. Looking forward to being there and hearing firsthand how we can strengthen our partnerships with our employer community. Mr. Tarando, our chief actuary, did notify me this morning that all of the valuations for the employers are fully uploaded to their web portal and are available for their use. Back to the Ed Forum real quickly. One of the highlights I think that we all enjoy is the Spotlight on Excellence Award, which recognizes a public employee, an agency, or program for excellence. Nominations will be accepted through this Friday, August 23rd at 5 p.m. And then information about the Spotlight on Excellence Award can be found on our website. And now investment performance year to date, the rolling, and this would be as of June 30th, 2019, the rolling one-year return of the fund is 6.7, the 3-year return is 8.8, the 5-year return is 5.8, and the 10-year return is 9.1. And then before I close, I just want to share one of the videos that was produced for our annual CalPERS Live event for all employees. It's really our all-employee meeting here. And this is our yearly opportunity to come together to celebrate accomplishments and talk about the priorities for the year ahead. And one of the focus areas that we had this year was on investments and the investment office and the role they play in serving our customers. And I think you'll see from this video the commitment that Ben and the entire investment office have and what they bring to the work that they do every day. So if we could roll that video.
Providing for retirement security of others is something that's a tremendous responsibility. And our job is to basically go out there and execute those trades as efficiently and cost effectively as we can.
Our investment office is a really critical part of our retirement benefits because 59 cents of every pension dollar comes from investments. I spent 16 years in the private sector in New York, in Mexico City, in Barcelona, Spain, and in London. And when I decided I wanted to settle down, I decided that CalPERS would be a fantastic place to continue my career.
Right before CalPERS, I was doing private equity here locally. Before that, I worked a few years in San Francisco and New York on Wall Street. And when the CalPERS opportunity came up, it was a great opportunity to get back trading, getting back into the public markets, and something I was really looking forward to doing here in Sacramento.
I graduated from Stanford with a double major in economics and international relations before coming to the Sacramento area. I started here at a very interesting time. That was a scary time. It was the global financial crisis, and the sector where I worked was really at the epicenter of that. But I learned a ton.
I always had this genuine curiosity about what makes certain economies more successful or less successful given the resources they have. But I also had a passion for doing something where I felt I was being valuable to society and contributing in some way. And CalPERS allowed me to really address both of those passions.
I just count myself very fortunate that I'm able to, as a daily job, do work that I'm passionate about, which is investing. But in the process, the work that I'm doing has that added benefit of accomplishing that goal of mine, which is serving others.
Every day I can come in and potentially have an impact on the fund, saving the fund millions of dollars potentially in transaction costs, in trading profit and loss. That challenge every day is what I really enjoy about the job.
What makes CalPERS special is that people are genuinely committed to the mission of serving those that serve California. My husband's a teacher, and my brother-in-law's a CHP officer, and I think if you go around the office, you hear a lot of stories of people that are personally connected to our members and to what we're doing.
My wife's grandmother is 92 years old. She continues to collect her CalPERS pension check. My own grandmother was a teacher and collected her check from CalSTRS until 1 month shy of her 106th birthday. Knowing that the work I do is helping people to live those years beyond retirement is tremendously rewarding. Every single day as I walk around our campus and I see our members and somebody's lost or somebody's coming into the building and I'm pointing somebody in the right direction or opening a door for somebody, it reminds me of that responsibility I have in my work, and it motivates me.
What really drives me, I think, to do my best at CalPERS is we believe in the CalPERS mission. Our funded ratio and how we're doing versus the promises we've made, right, to beneficiaries always comes up. It's always restated as our, most important mission, and we take that very seriously.
When you go home, you have a real sense of, I did something for someone today, and I'm helping provide them real, tangible security in terms of the retirement benefits.
Thank you. And just a quick note, that video was done and produced by our internal team, who's obviously quite talented. And I think the other takeaway is every time we have these interviews done with team members here at CalPERS, you can see the connection back to the benefits that we're paying, that there are family members, and there's this alignment to the mission that is much more than the compensation you're receiving, but just this value system that so many of our team have here at CalPERS. So thank you, President Jones, and that does conclude my report.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fechner, you want to be recognized now? Okay, Mr. Fechner.
Thank you. I have a question or comment for Ms. Frost. On the employers conference, I've been hearing from some employers with some frustration that so many classes filled up so quickly, and now they have employees that they were sending to get specific training, and it's not available to them. Those are the ones that filled up so fast. Is that possible to offer a second option for these folks?
We'll take a look at it. I think what we heard in Donna Lum's report is when we found that had happened at the CB, we found a way to open up new classrooms with the same content.
Great.
So I'll take that back to the team.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is action consent items, 6. And also you have an updated travel request in your folder. So do I have a motion on the action consent items? Moved by Mrs. Taylor. Second by Ms. Brown. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the item passes. I've not received a request to remove anything from the information consent items, so we will go to committee reports. And for the investment committee, I call on the chair, Mr. Fechner.
Thank you, Mr. President. The investment committee met on August 19th and 20th, 2019. The committee approved the following. Agenda item 8A, the establishment of a subcommittee to interview and recommend the candidates approved by the Committee for General Pension, Private Equity, Real Estate, and Infrastructure Consultants. The committee received reports on the following topics: the biannual summary of portfolio performance, risk, and the current economic outlook, a first reading of proposed changes to the total fund investment policy, annual review of the trust level portfolio management and opportunistic strategies programs, results from the annual board survey of investment consultants, a workshop covering the characteristics and role of global equity, and an overview of the ESG strategies of the Government Pension Investment Fund of Japan. The committee heard public comment on the following topics: the total fund policy, a staffing concern, investment strategy, and the risk of private detention centers. At this time, I would like to share some highlights of what to expect at the September Investment Committee meeting: the second reading of proposed revisions to the total fund policy, public fund universe comparison reports, and the public markets annual program review. The next meeting of the Investment Committee is scheduled for September 16th in Sacramento, California. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fechner. The next item is the Pension and Health Benefits Committee. Yes, we do. I'm sorry. Mr. Jelensik and Ms. Casey, please identify yourself and the organization, and you will have 3 minutes to speak.
J.J. Jelensik. I'd like to point out good behavior as well. And so I would like to actually call out Theresa Taylor for pointing out that there's a problem with the use of seasonal clerks. When a third of your support staff are seasonal clerks, there is something wrong. I don't know that it is happening beyond the program that was reviewed, but on the cockroach theory, I would encourage this board to certainly take a look and see if that classification is being abused elsewhere. And I would encourage you to look at using the retired annuitants, student assistants, graduate students, OAs, and OTs as is appropriate. Thank you.
Good morning, President Jones and members of the board. My name is Danielle Casey. I'm the Executive Vice President with the Greater Sacramento Economic Council. Ms. Frost mentioned our meetings before, and I thank you so much for that. I simply wanted to highlight today 2 letters that I believe you have all seen that were addressed to Ms. Frost and also copied to the board, highlighting our strong support and also the need for Class A development in our region, and specifically at 301 Capitol Mall. One of the letters submitted was authored by our board chair and vice chair with the Greater Sacramento Economic Council, and another was from Mayor Steinberg. And if I can just highlight a few of the comments in the letters, not the entire letter, in respect of your time. However, from the Greater Sacramento Economic Council board chair, Gary Mizell, he comments that when partners in our region engage in discussions to attract modern, fast-growing companies from other first-tier cities to expand into or relocate into our downtown core, the lack of available space with modern floor plates and amenities that can be delivered in targeted timelines precludes them from discussing our region's abundant talent and very attractive quality of life. Tower 301 represents a tremendous opportunity for CalPERS to capitalize on our growth as a modern, innovative economy. And if I can also highlight Mayor Steinberg's comments, he mentions that CalPERS has the opportunity to be a central part of the city's evolution by delivering the first state-of-the-art high-rise office building within Sacramento's urban core in more than 14 years. The Tower 301 project has enormous potential to positively affect the greater Sacramento region by providing critical Class A office space demanded by the recent influx of companies to the market. And CalPERS project on the partnership on the project will be impactful and visible, as Tower 301 will significantly reshape the city's skyline. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for your comments. The next item on the agenda is the Pension and Health Benefits Committee, and for that I call on the chair, Mr. Fackner.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Pension Health Benefits Committee, PHBC, met on August 20th, 2019. The committee received reports on the following topics. The committee received information on the importance of mental health and overall health and wellness, and CalPERS' role in ensuring members receive high-quality mental health care. The chair directed staff to request the CalPERS health plans provide the Pension and Health Benefits Committee a behavioral health and wellness update using the same set of presentation guidelines. Request the DMHC to provide the PHBC an overview of their role and strategies to increase timely access to behavioral health services and performance measures that monitor to determine adequacy. Provide detailed numbers for the percentages identified in the August 20th CalPERS mental health presentation. Evaluate the annual CalPERS Health Satisfaction Survey to ensure pertinent mental health questions are being asked. Provide the health plan contract information associated with care, including current quality measures we are holding the plans accountable to. Provide health plan data associated with parity law compliance. At this time, I'd like to share some highlights of what to expect at the November PHBC meeting. The committee will receive information on the Health Benefits Program annual report and review the final proposed regulations to PEMCA. The next meeting of the PHBC is scheduled for November 19th in Sacramento, California. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fackner. The next agenda item is the Finance and Administration Committee. We did not have a meeting, so no report. The Performance, Compensation, and Talent, we did not have a meeting, so no report. The Risk and Audit Committee, we did not have a meeting, so no report. The next item is 8F, Board Governance Committee, and for that I call on the Vice Chair, Ms. Pascal Rogers.
Sorry.
Hold on.
Am I on?
Hit your butt, yeah.
The Board Governance Committee met on August 20th. The committee recommends, and I move that the board approve the following. Agenda item 7A, accept the recommendations of work stream 1 and ask management to move forward to enrich the onboarding program for new board members and designees and develop education modules by committee partnering with specific organizations.
Okay, before we vote on that, we do have a request to speak on this item. Mr. Let's see where. Okay, I'm sorry. They keep changing my list here, so go. All those in favor of the committee recommendation, on the motion of the committee? Okay, Ms. Brown?
Thank you very much. I would just like to say that I'm happy that CalPERS is moving towards an onboarding program for new members. When Mr. Miller and I were elected and started in January of 2018, there was really no onboarding program other than a half-hour telephone conference call with our fiduciary counsel, and then talking with staff about the delegated authority, the authority that we delegate to the staff to do our work, and almost none of it was in writing. And so I hope as we move forward with this onboarding and developing these education modules that it becomes in print. It doesn't need to be a binder. It can be electronic, but that we keep it as a record, because the Pearl actually requires us to have a written onboarding program. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of this motion. My recollection of the onboarding was different. I felt it was pretty comprehensive. We spent several hours, went through policies, guidelines for behavior, guidelines for things like access to chambers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, but I think this goes the next step further, particularly with regard to our delegates and designees, and including them. Their role was extremely important, and they should have the same benefit of orientation and onboarding and educational opportunities that all of the board members who sit here and serve our members do. And so I'm very supportive of this motion.
So all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the item passes. Thank you.
The committee recommends, and I move that the board approve the following.
Yes. They want to speak on 8F, and we're not there yet. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
The committee recommends, and I move that the board approve the following. Agenda item 7B, accept the recommendations of Workstream 2 and ask management to bring back revisions to the board's rules and guidelines for the conduct of meetings and board governance policy to replace Robert's Rules of Order with Rosenberg's Rules of Order as the board's parliamentary guidance, and review board policies and documents with an eye toward streamlining and simplifying them.
On a motion of committee, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. No, Mr. Perez is opposed. The item passes.
The committee recommends an... Actually, can I ask a question? If I have a substitute motion on this, do I read it first?
Yes.
Okay. The committee recommends, and I move that the board approve the following, which is weird to me. Agenda item 7C, accept the recommendations on work stream 3 with some modifications, specifically 1, consolidate, and we're going to vote on each separately, right. Consolidate the current 2 strategy offsites into 1.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion by the committee, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the item passes.
Accept the recommendations of Workstream 3 and, with some modifications, specifically to institute an annual stakeholder forum.
On the motion of committee, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the item passes.
Consolidate the schedule of board monthly board and committee meetings as follows. Board meetings retain the current schedule. Investment committee 6 meetings per year. Other committees at least quarterly. I would like to make a substitute. Can I make a substitute
Yes.
motion on this? I'd like to make a substitute motion to consolidate the schedule of monthly board and committee meetings as follows. Board meetings quarterly and all other committees meeting quarterly.
So, been motion by Mrs. Pascal Rogers.
How do I?
Wait just a minute. And second by Mr. Miller. Now I could recognize you, Mr. Perez.
Sorry. Is there a way for me to do another?
You can substitute.
Substitute. Can I do a substitute?
Yes.
I would like that we have 6 meetings, and in those 6 meetings, it's all encompassing of all the board business, not including the offsites. So the Invo team wouldn't have to come to the offsites, just 6 meetings.
Okay, so that's the substitute motion. So we will take, is there a second? Second by Mrs. Brown. All those in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose?
No.
The item, yes. Electronic vote on this item? Voting on Mr. Perez, I mean, yeah. Electronically vote on Mr. Perez amended motion. Okay? Yeah, Mr. Perez, would you repeat your?
6 meetings where we all meet together and conduct the board business, not just the board, but committee business, and not including the offsites.
Okay, so the item fails. Now we go back to the main motion, Ms. Pascal Rogers' motion. All those in favor of that motion? Yeah. Discussion?
Discussion.
From Ms. Pascal. Repeat your motion, Ms. Pascal Rogers.
Right, to consolidate the schedule of monthly board and committee meetings to quarterly for board meetings and all other committees, at least quarterly.
Okay, is that clear? Okay, so I'm calling questions. You got to change this. So, Ms. Taylor.
So I just want to clarify. Thank you, Ms. Pascal Rogers. So we want the board meetings to be quarterly and all committee meetings to be quarterly. So we would have all the meetings together all at once quarterly? Is that what we're saying?
No, I believe that they're rotating on the committees.
Okay, so they wouldn't all end up together.
As it was recommended. I don't have those calendars in front of me.
I'm not sure. Okay. Okay, that's my question. So we're thinking that we have quarterly board meetings of which we rotate whether or not we have 3 or 4 committees per quarter meetings. Okay. Okay, I'm just trying to clarify.
Okay. Mr. Fechner.
Yeah, first of all, I don't understand how we can have a committee meeting if it's not the same time as a board meeting, because we have to approve what the committee did, first of all. So if we're not running them subsequently together, as Ms. Taylor pointed out, that's not going to work. But secondly, I'd like council to weigh in whether or not that meets our requirements for our ALJ decisions. Does that not miss timelines if we're only meeting every 3 months?
Mr. Jacobs.
On your first comment, Mr. Fechner, I believe it would still work with respect to having committee meetings in off months from the board meetings. You would just have a delay between the time of the committee action and the board's adoption of that action. As to your second question, it could create a problem with the OAH matters. We do have certain time limits that we have to meet. There may or may not be a way to comply with those with special, more limited meetings with respect to the board that would just focus on that. There's also alternatives with respect to doing that telephonically or through multiple venues. But it is a logistical issue, to be sure.
And telephonically doesn't allow the public to participate either.
Well, it could, because you could have it, you could notice it for this room, and the public could come here while board members wouldn't necessarily have to be here. They would still have to be in a place accessible to the public, but you could have the public come here.
Okay. I just think this creates more problems than it fixes, so I recommend a no vote.
Okay.
Mr. Jones.
Mr. Miller.
A couple of things I'll point out. The committee meetings quarterly would be distributed along with the board meetings, so we really wouldn't be reducing opportunities for the public, and we would really be mostly focused on efficiency and effectiveness and on reducing the burden, particularly on investment staff. Also, this is the minimum. The chair, at their discretion, could add additional meetings, could schedule more than 4 meetings if necessary, if there are issues of timing, versus board decisions. It's a model that challenges us to be more agile, to be more flexible, to be making decisions as we need to, rather than calendaring things that we may not need to do and which will create a bunch of additional work unless we need to. But if we do need to, we certainly can. So I would urge an aye vote on this.
Mr. Rubalcaba.
Yes, my initial question was I wanted some clarification, but I think it was responded to, so I would just speak that we had our deliberation just earlier, and I would stay with the initial. I think it would have merit to stay with the initial recommendation. Thank you.
Ms. Middleton. Jason.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe I understand what the intention of Ms. Pascal Rogers is, which is to have all committee meetings be a minimum of 4 times a year. I do think there are still some clarity issues as to, in the minds of many people, as to exactly when would we be meeting, what committees would meet when. And if she would accept a friendly amendment, it would be that we ask staff to, both in terms of the legal requirements and scheduling requirements, to come back to us at the September meeting with a proposed agenda for 2020 that would reflect staff's understanding of what it is that we are recommending, so that if there is any confusion on the part of anyone, we will have an opportunity in September to rectify any misunderstandings.
Do you accept that friendly amendment?
I do. Thank you.
Okay, so then that is the motion that we will be voting on. So,
excuse me, Chair.
Wait a minute, we're not done.
President Jones, you need to make sure that the second also is okay with the amendment.
Mr. Miller concurs with the second. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Okay, we're not finished yet. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I thought we were going to a vote. I too am confused, and Ms. Pascal Rogers, I started to hear you say that you had seen a calendar, and that was my request yesterday. I think this is very confusing, and I don't know how we make this vote without actually seeing how it's going to lay out, not only just for the board, but for our stakeholders as well. And so my suggestion, or maybe it's my substitute motion, is that we hold over this discussion until we can actually take a look at the alternate choices, because yesterday, I was not on the committee, but yesterday it was very confusing on the motions and the substitute motions and the substitute of the substitute motions, and it was really quite confusing, and I think it would be much better if we held this over until we could see the sample calendars and actually vote on what it's going to look like at the later
So
date.
are you making a motion?
Yes, to hold it over until next month.
Ms. Brown made a motion. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Perez. So the vote will be on Mrs. Brown's motion, and she's saying no vote on the item as opposed to the previous motion, with the friendly amendments, and bring back the details in September. So Ms. Brown's motion, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Can we have a
Okay.
electronic vote on all the rest, please? Thank you.
Okay, let's take a vote on that motion. Well, wait a minute. I got some more speakers. Just a minute. Just a minute. Sorry. Ms. Taylor.
Yes, thank you. I think I I think we're running into the main sticking point, which was something entirely different than we talked about yesterday, the board meetings. I think the investment committee meetings that we were looking at keeping down quarterly, and the rest of the meetings to do quarterly makes sense. The board meetings, yeah, maybe we do need to see a calendar, because I can foresee us having 3 days of very, very full late meetings if we only do quarterly meetings. So I think it's important that we consider that. I mean, you know, I don't know if we need to vote this through or come back for it. I hate to put it off to September, because I think the main sticking point for me and some of the other folks is the board meetings. I think if we extended the amount of board meetings, and I'd be happy to make another substitute motion, to extend the board meetings to retain the current schedule, and then keep the investment committee and all the other committees to quarterly, and then move on from there, because then we can see whether or not staff even thinks we need all those meetings. It doesn't mean we have to have those meetings. So I would like to make that as a substitute motion.
Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Taylor and second by Mr. Rubalcaba. Ms. Taylor, would you restate your motion so we're clear?
So I would like to make a motion to consolidate the schedule of monthly board and committee meetings as follows. Board meetings retain the current schedule. All other committee meetings meet at least quarterly, including investments.
Okay, that's the motion. But we have several speakers. Is the request to speak on Ms. Taylor's motion? Okay, Mr. Perez.
I think the goal here is to balance our responsibilities as a board, as fiduciaries, as trustees, and free up staff, not just the investment team, but all staff, to be able to do their day job, what they should be concentrating on. I think the balance of 6 meetings a year is good. We're cutting their time in half. Cutting it down to a quarter, I think, is unacceptable.
Okay. Ms. Pascal Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank our colleagues on this board who work for at least 8 months on trying to put this work stream together. They talked with experts like Carrie Dominguez. They talked with stakeholders. And really, this is an effort for us to be more efficient, to do so that we can be better board members. But really, when we delegate responsibility to the staff, that they have that the opportunity to do their jobs. And so I agree, Mr. Perez. I think that I'd be willing to go to to have this conversation, but I believe that change, and sometimes change is tough, is really is what is recommended. And so I want to say that I understand that it'd be better to see a calendar. Ms. Brown, I hadn't seen a calendar. I had said that I have seen calendars where the committees are scheduled on different months. And so I just hope that when we make this decision, that we are thinking about what's in the best interest of our mission, and that is, these guys making the most money they can for this fund. Thank you.
Ms. Ortega?
Yeah, I just want to clarify Ms. Taylor's motion. So when you say the current calendar, it would be the 9 board meetings and the offsite and the stakeholder forum. Is that correct?
No, I think, is it 9 meetings with the,
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, because we're getting rid of one of the offsites.
I just continue to think that that's an excessive number of meetings, to have 11 meetings a year of the full board together. I think this entire effort was around, as Ms. Pascal Rogers mentioned, of being more efficient, reducing the number of board meetings. I think there is a consensus on the board to reduce by some number. So I would hope that we could be logical and work this out. We've had 6 board meetings on the table. That motion failed. We have now back to 11, essentially 11, 9 board meetings and 2 other opportunities where we're all together. I think what I will do is try yet another effort and maybe make a substitute motion for 7 meetings per year, including the offsite. And so that would be there would be an offsite, a stakeholder forum, and 5 board meetings. I think, Mr. Jacobs, I would like to understand more if you think that 6 will keep us out of complications around the appeals. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to set a structure in place that we're constantly working around with phone calls. And if you think it makes more sense to have 6 standing board meetings to address all the business that has to be accomplished on a specified time frame, and then we did 6 plus the offsite and the stakeholder forum, the board would be together 8 times a year. The investment committee would be 4 of those times under the current proposal. It feels to me that 8 times a year working the committee, other committee work in there.
You want
so
to,
I'm going to make that motion.
Okay.
I've worked it out myself. I'm going to make a motion to have 6 board meetings.
Second.
It's been moved by Ms. Ortega and second by Mr.
And let me just
Perez.
complete the motion so everyone is clear what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
6 board meetings, 1 offsite, 1 stakeholder forum, 4 investment committee meetings. All of the other subcommittees would be scheduled along with those 6 standing board meetings so that any committee, subcommittee work would be able to be acted on at that time by the board. It seems to me that over 6 meetings that work can be properly scheduled.
Or at least
out.
Quarterly, as the language says here?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Some subcommittees don't need to meet quite as often. So that's my motion.
Okay. So we have now a new motion on the table, and Mr. Rubalcaba, Ms. Brown, are your comments on that motion? Yes. Mr. Rubalcaba.
Thank you. I'll speak to the substitute motion on table. We are making quite a bit of change from the deliberation from yesterday, and I was willing to go with Ms. Taylor's motion, which was reducing the number of investment committee meetings from 6 to quarterly, because I think the discussion was to free up the staff to focus on investments. We need to allow them that time, and we would have less meetings of the commencement. However, to amend the number of board meetings, I think is a little too much. We do have a fiduciary duty to be on top of the business of this Board of Administration and CalPERS. So I think the current schedule is not overbearing. It's not monthly. It's just 9, right? Right? So I understand it. So I'm speaking against a substitute motion there.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I did hear Ms. Ortega agreed to say at least 4 meetings. Is that at least 4 quarterly meetings? Because I do have concerns about us being able to fulfill our fiduciary duty with the investments with only 4 quarterly meetings. But if it's at least, then I think I'm going to support your motion, because I really do not believe we need 9 board meetings. We don't need to be flying up here 9 times plus 2 other meetings. I think that 6 plus the 2 is great. So even though I don't agree with the 4 for investment committee, I'm going to try and get us to be efficient. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for a vote on Ms. Ortega's motion. Ms. Ortega, would you repeat your motion? Hit your button.
6 board meetings. I'm just going to say the total. 6 board meetings, 1 offsite, 1 stakeholder, at least quarterly investment committee meetings.
Okay, and
at least quarterly
other
meetings.
Other subcommittees, at least quarterly
okay.
as well. Yes.
So everyone's clear on the motion. Mr. Perez was the second on that. Okay, so that's what we're voting on. And the request is to vote electronically?
Yeah.
So, the item passes, so all the other motions are non-existent now. Okay, go on, Mrs. Pascal. Yeah. Yeah. Wait, just a minute. No. Okay.
Yeah. So I do have a point of order on that. I want to thank you for giving me our Robert's Rules of Order book. But actually, it turns out we had 7 motions on the floor, and Robert's Rules only allow for 3. So I'm not sure if that's going to affect what we just did there. But again, if we're going to be doing this, you're not allowed to have that many substitute motions going at one time. So I'm not sure who our parliamentarian is, Mr. Jacobs. I think it might be you.
No, we did
but
not,
it is a problem.
Yeah, we did not have 7. We had, actually, it was 4 motions that I
Yeah, it
asked
should only be
for,
3. So
and I
that's the
understand
maximum.
it's, you know.
Is that a problem?
No, it's not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the motion that we voted on passed, so now we will move on to the next item, Ms. Pascal Rogers.
Establish a consistent structure for board committees meeting. Oh, wait, never mind. Pardon me. All right, let me see, hold on. Agenda item 7D. No.
Have to go back.
That was right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Establish a consistent structure for board committees, meaning that the investment committee will no longer be a committee of the whole.
Okay, on the motion of the committee, what's the pleasure of the board? Okay, we have speakers on this one, but Mr. Perez.
As we saw yesterday, there are some people on board governance that really wanted to make motions and contribute to the conversation other than just speaking on it. I think when it comes to an investment, as specifically as our role, I think it's reckless to lower our numbers. It should be a committee of the whole.
Okay. Okay, so that's the Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate, as I said yesterday, investments is, if not the most important committee, it has to be the most important committee. The complexity, the consequence of failures, the consequence of indecisiveness, the consequence of not delving deeply enough and bringing the talents of the board to bear on it in a concentrated way. And right now, in effect, we don't have an investment subcommittee. We have a board, and the board meets. We need an investment subcommittee of the board to add that additional. This is an additive change. We're actually adding additional rigor, additional resources, additional effort, and to, just like we do when subcommittees of our committees are formed, to put more of a focus and bring more specific expertise and to hone things even more before they come to the full board. And the idea that other board members would not be able to participate, I mean, today definitely shows that this system works. When a subcommittee puts something together, and even a work stream group beyond that subcommittee focuses, brings things to a committee. That subcommittee brings things to the board, and the full board still engages in a fulsome discussion and debate, and it doesn't mean a rubber stamp of anything, but it does bring a lot more scrutiny, a lot more concentrated effort, a lot more thought to bear. And if there's anywhere that we need that, it's in investment committee, and we need to have a true investment committee to bring things to the board for the board to fully debate and make the final decisions. So I would urge an aye vote on this.
Okay, I see what the problem is on the public speakers, because on our agenda for the meeting, it's labeled one way, but the reference yesterday is a different number. So that's why we're getting a little confused on, because you've asked to speak on an item that's not here, but I think you want to speak on this item, so I'm going to call you and see if that's the case. Mr. Barron's, Mr. Coops, Mr. Fontaine, Miss Patola, Miss, and Mr. Jelensi. So if you could just wait we're going to use these 2 seats here, and then you wait your turn. And when you speak, you have 3 minutes. Identify yourself and your association.
Thank you, President Jones, members of the board. Tim Barron's, President of California State Retirees. A couple of things that were said in the last discussion I want to respond to first. And Ms. Rogers, the stakeholders from my 40,000 members were never asked about the issue that was brought up, that you gave credit to the stakeholders getting that information about changing the meeting schedule. We weren't.
The school employees.
I don't know who told you that, but we weren't
last
asked.
night, the school employees. Sorry.
And I have a question about Board Member Ortega's motion. Was that for this year or for next year? Because there was no year, there was only a number of meetings. And if you go for this year, we've already had 6 meetings. So what did that motion mean?
Practically, it's next year.
Okay, well, it would be helpful to me and the audience in the future if when you make a motion, you could have the whole motion read that would make sense, at least. That would be helpful. So let's go to this current issue. The 40,000 stakeholders that I represent, they expect this board to have our backs on our pension all the time. Not just 6 of you, not just 9 of you, but all of you. I cannot think of a logical reason why the entire board would not be on the investment committee. I just haven't heard that argument made. I think yesterday there was a lot of lively debate. I'm a strong proponent of lively debate. I think that shows a strength in a board to have a debate and have 2 sides of an issue debated. But when it comes to this particular issue, I can't see any logic to why you want to reduce the number of people. You say it won't make any difference because those other board members that are not on the committee can still come to the committee and debate. So why eliminate them at all? This doesn't make any sense to me at all. The other question I have, and maybe Mr. Jones, you can answer this, is how are the members of committees selected? Is there some selection process that you go through, or interviews, or using the strength of the board member for that particular committee, or how's that done?
Okay, finish your comment. I'll answer your question when you.
That's all. I'm finished.
Yes. Yeah, the president is responsible for assigning board members to the various committees. And to your point, one is the interest of the member that have expressed an interest of being assigned to a certain committee. And when there's more requests than there are seats on that committee, it goes to that strength and longevity and a number of other issues to make that decision.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Fontaine?
I'm Jerry Fontaine. I'm Chief Financial Officer for California State Retirees. I'd like to speak briefly about item 7B, Robert's Rules of Orders versus Rosenberg's. It was demonstrated quite obviously yesterday at the committee meeting and a little bit today that there is a need for Robert's Rules of Orders. It was presented yesterday as a document that's 751 pages long, and Rosenberg is much more reduced in size and volume. Unless you're a parliamentarian, that 751 pages means something. But as a committee member, and I've served on many committees, you don't need that level of knowledge instantly. It's a great resource document, so I would suggest that you stick with Robert's Rules of Order. Having said that, when you get to item 7D, talking about the Code of Conduct, it was presented to the committee yesterday based on Robert's Rules of Order. Now, having decided to go to Rosenberg, does that mean all the work that the committee did previously is null and void because there may be some conflicting sentences in the 2 documents? And if there's nothing that conflicts between the 2 documents, why move away from Robert's Rules of Order? It's already in place, and it's the most common doctrine for conducting meetings with almost every organization in this country, no matter if it's a bridge club or if it's CalPERS board. It's a common document. Stick with it. And in closing, I think we need to focus on the consequences of conflicting motions. And I also believe that the mainstream teams were tasked with coming up with change, and so change was made for change's sake and not to benefit the committees or the board or the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. identify yourself and your organization. Wait just a minute. Put her mic on. There you go.
Good morning, Mr. President and board members. My name is Mani J. Fatulahi, California State Retirees District B Director. This is my first time attending this CalPERS meeting. As Board of Trustee at CalPERS, I just want to thank your time, your talent, your experiences for all the shareholders, stakeholders. Yesterday we were discussing the code of conduct and based on the board governance policy and Robert's Rule of Order and Rosenberg's Rule of Orders. It kind of looked ambiguous, especially when Ms. Simpson was talking about number 9 in that article that I think it said that it was almost 30 years old. For me, it was a plain English language, but as we asked our parliamentarian, Mr. Jacobs, he said he didn't understand what it means. The reason I'm here right now is that I noticed as audience, chair members were confused, frustrated at some points, and their motions several times were overseen. My question right now is that doesn't the materials need to be discussed beforehand, before any CalPERS meeting? We had closed session, to my knowledge, for 2 hours that I heard is an ice cream social. I do agree with Mr. Miller that we do need an investment subcommittee, and for any particular motions, items need to be discussed for any clarification beforehand, and then be discussed and brought up to the audience. Ms. Ordekes talked yesterday that her heart is to save money for the members. That's why I'm here. And I know the motion had passed right now, but I think as trustees, you need to do your job. You need to attend every month. We don't need to cut back any months. And if you're here, we need to work. And I don't think any cutbacks. I know we need to save money on travel, but I think we make enough money for travel for members who care to be here. And bottom line, have proposed agenda before meetings for any misunderstandings to fulfill the fiduciary duties like Ms. Brown mentioned. And I just thank you so much for giving me this time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Falai. I do need to clarify one comment that you made. Sure. You mentioned that we were in closed session for an ice cream social. That is not true.
I'm sorry, I heard.
Okay, thank you. All right.
People talk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Mr. Coops.
Okay. Good morning, members of the CalPERS board and staff. My name is Richard Kopis, and I'm a retiree of CalPERS. I served as your Deputy Executive Officer and General Counsel for 10 years, from 1986 to 1996. During that tenure, I also founded and ran the world-famous CalPERS Corporate Governance Program. After retiring from CalPERS, I went on to work part-time as of counsel for a huge international law firm as their governance expert, advising both their corporate and nonprofit clients, both in this country and around the world. In addition to that work, I served as a governance fellow at Stanford University School of Law, where I taught governance and ran a variety of governance programs for the law school for 20 years. Lastly, since my retirement from CalPERS in 1996, I have served on the total of 12 boards, 4 corporate boards and 8 nonprofit boards, including the NACD National Board, where I serve with your consultant, Carrie Dominguez. I tell you all this just as a way of introduction to why I am here today, and that is to strongly urge your adoption of the governance reforms that your committee and staff and consultant have brought forward, that you have debated here today, and I strongly and firmly endorse the motion that is now before the floor. I believe these reforms will make this board more efficient and effective in its important oversight and policy-making roles. And if I can add, just on a personal note, how fortunate I believe the board is, and CalPERS in general, to have your excellent executive staff here working for you, especially your CEO and your general counsel, who holds a position that I used to have. I thank you very much for allowing me to address you today, and a special thank you for all of your service to CalPERS and to we retirees. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Jelensik?
J.J. Jelensik. When you look at the transcript, assuming you choose to do so, you will realize that the meeting schedule adoption was not consistent with Robert's Rules of Order, was not consistent with Rosenberg's rules. On the other hand, it doesn't matter because it's just a rule. But what I actually came up to speak about was the investment committee. One of the disadvantages of having been around as long as I have is I've got a lot of historical knowledge. And I will tell you that for years, the investment committee was 13 people, the entire board, but it did not have final authority. So things would get discussed on Monday, a decision would be reached, and it would come back to the full board on Wednesday. Very rarely, but occasionally, because of things that developed in between, those motions were changed. So I just want to point out that you can have all 13 people on the investment committee and still have it come to the whole board simply by taking away the committee's authority to make a final decision. So you ought to put that into your thought process. Thank you.
Okay. That concludes this request to speak on that item. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I want to agree with what Mr. Barron said from the California State Retirees Association, that I too don't see any value or any benefit to removing board members from the investment committee. We are fiduciaries, we are trustees, we are responsible for the funds, all of us, all 13 of us, financially responsible. And I myself would not want to be relegated to the role of observer, and I wouldn't want to do that to any of you. So I'm going to make a substitute motion that we keep the investment committee as a committee of the whole. Thank you.
Okay. So the substitute motion is keep the investment committee as a whole. Moved by Ms. Brown, and is there a second? Second by Ms. Ross. So we're going to take a electronic votes at the as requested on that particular motion. So all those, you know, you. And everybody's not voting, so what's going on? Who's not voting? Okay, that's a no, so the motion fails. Okay, so now we go back to the original motion, which was establish consistent structure for all board committees. And Mr. Perez, did you second that motion? What Ms. Pascal Rogers made on, no, who seconded that? Somebody did.
It doesn't need a second because it's a board. It's a board motion.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Excuse me, a committee motion. It doesn't require a second.
Okay, so then we're going to vote on the committee motion then. Yeah. Okay. But as Mr. Jacobs mentioned, we really don't need a second, because it's committee recommendation, a motion. So let's vote. Yes. So the motion fails.
No.
Wait, no, it's not.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Okay, the motion passes. Okay, so, yep. So wait a minute, so who's not voting? Okay, you abstain?
You have to hit yellow, don't you?
Didn't want to vote, okay. Okay, Okay, but the item passes. Okay, Ms. Rogers.
Agenda item 7D, accept the recommendation of Workstream 4 to develop and adopt a board code of conduct.
Now, that item we decided to not actually vote on at the committee, and that it was referred back to the Workstream members to take another pass with the input from the legal office.
This is just for the, actually doing the
So they can do the work.
Oh, do the work, yeah, okay, so, okay, but I just wanted to make it clear, because it's not listed here, what the work is.
Yep.
Okay, because we did not take action on the document itself. Okay, so, would you change my screen again? So the item passes. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Rogers.
Agenda item 7E, accept the recommendation of Workstream 5 to build out the technology platform Insight.
On the motion of the committee. Okay, would you change my screen so I could call on her? Pam, would you change my screen so I can call on her? Okay, Ms. Brown.
Thank you. From what I know, since I was on the very beginning parts of this work stream with this new Insight tool, I think it will improve accountability and transparency, because it supposedly will allow our stakeholders or anybody, the press, to get on and see the documents more quickly or as available as we do. But I do want to make sure that we reiterate that there is no tracking, that people won't have to register, sign up, use a password to get into the Insight tool, that anybody can use that, Ms. Frost, and that it won't be required that we're tracking who's using it and what they're looking at, whether it be board or the public.
Correct. I did, in addressing your question in Governance Committee meeting yesterday, I did check in with Mr. Taylor, who is managing the project for this implementation, and he did concur that it has no tracking as you described.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Green-Ross?
Yes, and is it possible, this is just a suggestion, that we could have our investment committee consultants participate in the project development to see if they had any suggestions of how they could add information that would be of value to the board?
Yes, one of the consultants approached me last evening and offered to help, and so we would be happy to include them in the project. And then, in addition, Controller Yee's suggestion that we have a tab for consultant information for the board. That way you're able to easily distinguish.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so the motion from the committee? Take a vote.
You have to wait.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, the item passes. Thank you. Ms. Pascal Rogers.
Thank you. The next meeting of the Board Governance Committee is tentatively scheduled for September 17th. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that work. Now we move to agenda item, what time is it? Okay, we got time. Agenda item 9, Assembly Bill 731. Mr. Brown.
Good morning, Mr. President and board members. Danny Brown, CalPERS team member. We're bringing AB 731, authored by Assemblymember Calra, before you today with a support recommendation. This bill expands on the individual and small group health plan market data reporting and rate review by the Department of Managed Healthcare and the Department of Insurance by generally applying this process to the large group market. I think first, it's important to point out that this bill only applies to the HMO plans we contract with and not to our self-funded PPO plans. And second, that it does not alter the CalPERS rate-setting process or the board's rate-setting authority. However, HMO plans that CalPERS contracts with would be subject to additional reporting to the DMHC and DMHC would determine whether the methodology, factors, and assumptions that the plans use to determine their rates are unreasonable or not justified. This review of methodology may provide CalPERS visibility into plan rates from other large group purchasers. It may also validate our own data and experience with our own health plans. Essentially, the bill is intended to create greater overall transparency about how large group health plan rates are built. But even though it may not give us any additional data that we already get from our own plans, it does support the visibility of the large group market. Finally, as a contract holder, CalPERS could ask DMHC to review the rate change by our health plans. Even though I don't anticipate you doing that, you do have that ability. This bill promotes greater transparency in the large group health plan market, which is a principle CalPERS has consistently supported. And with that, I'll answer any questions you may have.
Can you hear me?
Now it's on.
Can you hear me? Okay. Ms. Green-Ross?
Thank you. First, this seems like the staff think this is well intended to increase transparency, and that's wonderful. The controller definitely supports that. But I have a couple of questions worried about unintended consequences. But first and foremost, if this is an important issue that if it could help on our rate negotiation, is there a way, just generally process-wise, where we don't wait till we have bills in the suspense file at the end of August to be talking about them? Because if we wanted to suggest amendments, we really have like no more room to maneuver here. And so this is being brought to the full board, and I wish the health committee could have discussed this so that we could really understand the value it would bring to our negotiation process. So that's just a suggestion of timing on key legislative issues that I would hope that we could fold into our schedule earlier because of the legislative process. But on this particular bill, I trust the staff and the health benefits staff in particular has made sure that it won't interfere with our rate setting process on our schedule. As I read through the bill and the bill analysis, anybody can trigger the assessment by the regulator on whether the rates that are being put forth by the HMOs to the regulator, and the bill says it has to be evaluated within 60 days, and I know that DMHC has current staff to do that for the small group rate market. We have our own data on our own experience, but I worry that would and could, and I'd like to ask the staff that's worked on our health negotiation, if the regulator approved rates that we were still negotiating that we thought were too high, could that be used against us in our negotiations? Could that be a problem? So I have a question about letting DMHC in this role when we have a fiduciary duty to negotiate for the rates as low as possible. I do understand that having more transparency of lots of group plans out there available is a good thing, but I just worry that it would affect the timing of our decision making should the trigger for their evaluation of our own rates come at the wrong time. And secondly, if they bless rates that we still think are too high, is that going to be used against us? And how do we avoid that?
Oh, go ahead.
Kim Malm, CalPERS team member. Certainly, if that trigger was pulled during the rate setting process where we are in the middle of doing all of that, it could take us away from doing that work. However, we do believe in the transparency aspect of it, and we believe that that's all good stuff. But there could be some timing issues, and there could be that you approve a number that they don't, as opposed to them approving a number that you don't as well. But we agree with the transparency of it. Devil can be in the details, and so when it would trigger and the type of information that we'd be required to give is still under question.
I mean, I appreciate that, but again, there is a risk. That's an unintended consequence that often happens with well-intended legislation, is that the regulator blesses a rate and we don't like the rate, and the plans come back and use that and we get put in a box. I mean, if I'm negotiating, I wouldn't want that,
Yeah, I mean,
used against me, and that would definitely be a strong tool that they would have to argue against them.
I mean, I think it's kind of a nuance in the sense that they're reviewing and making a determination about the methodologies and assumptions and the factors that the health plans are using, not necessarily the rate, but obviously if they question the methodology, that would then trigger whether or not the rate that was set based on that methodology is an accurate number. But based on my understanding of the bill and talking with folks, is that it doesn't necessarily change what the board does, whether or not that put pressure on the board to change the rate or come back with something else, but it doesn't change what you can set or tell you can't set a certain rate once you've set it.
That I understand completely, yeah. But it's a bargaining issue when you're negotiating rates on, you're sitting across an opponent wanting one thing and they've got a statutory regulator blessing. You're not in as good a bargaining position. That's all. I'm just pointing that out. That is just a concern. I do understand long term having the data out there is the transparency is ideal, and the controller definitely supports that concept. But we also have a fiduciary duty to get the lowest rates we can, and I just don't want to have us be in that situation where we have given away, our ability to have good arguments for lower rates. That's all.
Yes, I completely understand your point, Karen, or Ms. Green-Ross. One of the things that we are doing is looking back at the process that we use in May, issuing preliminary rates, and then June, bringing them to the board on final rates. We believe that process is not working well, and we are working with the health plans right now to see if we can design a new process that might help address the issue that you just described about putting transparency about rates out there way too early. We firmly agree that the rates that are given in May are inflated, and we do not want people taking action on those rates.
I think, as it was pointed out to me, and what I was kind of thinking too, is there's nothing to review until the board adopts the rate. So I think that really the fear is if you adopt a rate, it's out there now and it's going to go through the review process and they're going to review the methodology. It's just whether or not you've adopted a rate that DMHC now comes in and says, oh, the methodology the health plan used is not justified or is unreasonable, but you've already kind of looked at it and blessed it. Now, my understanding is it's the same process that Covered California follows for their individual and small group plans, and they've yet to have DMHC say anything that they've approved has been unreasonable or unjustified.
And then I guess the last question is, if this is believed and perceived to be helpful to our process, why didn't we sponsor it?
Okay. All right, Ms. Taylor.
I agree with Ms. Green-Ross. I'm wondering if we want to do a support with, because it sounds to me like there's a possibility that CalPERS has the negotiation after we've agreed to a rate, then the negotiation gets taken out of our hands. And DMHC can possibly then negotiate the rates to what they think is appropriate or whatever. I agree that we need the transparency. If we have all large employer groups transparency in terms of rates, then we can compare them with what we're getting, and I think that's great information. But is there a way to do a yes on this and say if CalPERS authority is left intact?
I mean, we can offer, the board can offer up a support if amended. Obviously, it'll be up to the sponsors and author at this time to make that change. And as Ms. Karen Green-Ross has pointed out, it is kind of late in the process, and part of that was the bill came out of suspense in May with a number of amendments, and we were trying to catch up on those, and this was kind of the first opportunity to bring it back to the board or the committee following those major amendments.
So it's too late for amendments?
It's not too late, but I'm just saying you can make a motion of support if amended, and again, it's we're just at the mercy of whether or not the author and the sponsors are willing to take that amendment and put it in the bill. But the bill can still be amended.
Have we even talked to the author about this?
We've talked to them, and I've raised with them that, there are concerns about, impeding on the board's authority. I don't think they necessarily view it the same way that we do. And they feel that, you still have your rate-setting authority, and it doesn't interfere with the rate-setting process. So I think there may be a difference of opinion, but obviously if you take a position here, that could change, their interpretation.
So, because I think there's a couple of good things. I mean, I think it's good that DMHC is doing this. It gives us more information to compare to. But I also think it's been, since I first started on the board, there were a couple of attempts by the previous administration, to take over our board authority for negotiating health rates. So I'm a little concerned about that. And I'm wondering if I can offer, rather than just accepting this, that I offer an amendment that says we will accept this if amended. That it says something about our authority, it protects our authority.
I probably just need a little bit more clarity as to what that amendment would be. I guess it would probably, you don't want DMHC to determine whether your health plans that contract with CalPERS, whether or not those rates or those methodologies are unreasonable or not justified, but all the other reporting is fine. Is that kind of the thought? Well, I'm just trying to, I'm wondering if the amendment is support if amended to exclude CalPERS health plans from having their assumptions and methodologies reviewed by DMHC. So I don't know how that.
Yes. Excuse me, Ms. Green-Ross. You need to be recognized. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Are you finished with your question?
So we're saying, say that again, Danny, because I'm a little confused.
So I think we can talk to them about just putting something in the bill that states that nothing in this bill would interfere with the board's authority to set the rates and over the CalPERS health plans. Something like that. So then we go to a support if amended. Okay.
Right. Is that the motion?
That's the motion.
Okay. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Miller. Okay. We have further requests to speak. Mr. Fector.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. Danny, I think it needs to be spelled out very clear, and it needs to say in the writing that CalPERS authority stays intact. If they're not willing to accept that as an amendment, that means it's a bigger issue. Okay. So if they're not willing to put it in writing, then I don't think we should be supporting this at all. And I know there's stakeholders in the room that are pushing us to move this forward. I totally agree with their premise. At the same time, they should be able to help you get that language put in place. If they truly are going to leave CalPERS alone and leave our autonomy alone, it needs to be stated clearly.
Okay. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I'm all for transparency, but my primary concern is that this directly or indirectly could impact our position in terms of setting rates and our negotiations. The other thing, and I don't want this to come across as casting aspersions on another agency because I have no direct experience with DMHC, but I do have direct experience with our incredible team, our negotiating team, our healthcare team, our actuaries. And I think we bring capability and capacity to this subject that no one else does. And I really don't see them, and I may be wrong, but adding much value, but a lot of potential, downside potential for them to impact our position, our negotiations. I don't think they have anywhere near the actuarial and healthcare rate negotiation expertise that we do, and I think they could potentially kind of gum up the works for us. I do have some direct experience with another state agency in the realm of dental rates and stuff, and I will tell you my experience was they do not have actuarial expertise and have set rates in ways that are not actuarially sound, and So I'm concerned, as much as I value transparency, if this has the potential to impact us adversely, directly or even 3 degrees out from directly, we should be prepared to take and oppose if we can't get amendments that really inspire confidence and assure us that it won't.
Mr. Ruffino?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay.
I guess the first question would be, will the bill analysis, I mean, have we thought about this unintended consequences, or is that just something that we're thinking about it today? With that said, you know, in order to rein and understand the rising premiums, you know, we just need to better understand how these prices are charged by the hospitals, by the doctors, by the drug makers, because that's what drives up premiums and overall system cost. So it's incredibly, so this measure essentially extends this rate review, and whether it makes the determination of unjustified or reasonable rates, you know, to the employer in the large group market, and adds this disclosures and this transparency, you know, that and for all products sold in the state of California. So the state treasurer, in principle, favors transparency and is definitely supporting. We are certainly this new nuance about whether this can impact our ability. It's something that we need to take into consideration. So I hope that we can get an analysis or an understanding to make sure that we safeguard our options, you know, as the board. Thank you.
Mr. Rubalcaba.
Thank you, Mr. President. Large groups in general have an advantage over small groups in access to data, into negotiating, understanding the utilization, the rate setting process, what have you. CalPERS, as the biggest purchaser, has even a greater advantage. So I think it's important that CalPERS weigh in support of the general universe, because it's something we want to extend to everybody, like an even playing field. I don't think the bill, the way it's written, will undermine that authority we have. So, but I do support Ms. Taylor's amendment to have language in there that says it will not undermine or in any way prohibit our rate review. And I think I'm standing in support of the motion, and I would call for the question.
Okay. Mr. Brown, would you restate your understanding of the motion so we all hear the same thing?
Well, I believe it's support if amended, as long as CalPERS authority to CalPERS rate setting authority stays intact. It's kind of the general consensus I think I got from Ms. Taylor and Mr. Fechner.
Okay, so it was moved by Ms. Taylor, second by Mr. Miller. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the item passed. Oh, no, Ms. Ortega as an abstention. Okay, then we have 3 speakers. Mario Yadia, Sarah Phlox, and Jasmine Pill. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and would you please identify yourself and your organization?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Sarah Phlox. I'm from the California Labor Federation. We represent 2 million union members in both the private and public sector. We're one of the sponsors of AB 731. And just first want to say, we very much respect preserving CalPERS authority. We will take this position back to our author. And of course, ask about the amendments. I do want to answer some of the questions about how AB 731 works. My co-sponsor will get into how Covered California has lived under this regime for since 2013 doing negotiations. But the way that this bill works is that for the experience rated groups, so for basically the plans that CalPERS has, DMHC, and not DMHC's actuaries, who we have met with, are going to review the methodology. So basically the formula where all our data goes in and how these plans basically come up with what the rate is. Some of our trust funds have come to us and said, you know what, Kaiser, they're kind of a black box because we have our claims data, we know what our utilization is. They somehow put that all into a black box and come out with a rate that is just incredibly high. So this is a little bit of having the actuaries unlock that box and look at it. The only people that can trigger a full rate review in any way is the contract holder. That would be PERS. No one else can ask for that for your plans. So all that would be reviewed is the methodology. Your rate negotiations, the rates that you agree upon, would never be reviewed by DMHC unless CalPERS specifically asked for it. I assume that given the data and expertise that CalPERS has, you will never ask for that. But a lot of the funds that I represent probably will, because we just don't have the same number of lives and power that CalPERS has. So that's the way we structured it. And we structured it to make sure that we did not interfere at all with CalPERS negotiations, maybe give you a little leverage, give you a little bit of a look of across the large group market. But really, this is designed for the rest of us who are 100 covered lives or greater, who just do not have the same leverage and really need that transparency and expertise of the actuaries at DMHC to do an analysis for reasonableness. So thank you very much. We hope we can have your full support.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Yasmin Peled for Health Access California, California's Health Consumer Advocacy Coalition. Thank you to the CalPERS Board for your consideration of this measure. Health Access is proud to co-sponsor AB 731 with the California Labor Federation, Unite Here, SEIU California, and the Teamsters. AB 731 builds on existing and proven rate review practices here in California by extending that review to the large group market, as you heard from Mr. Brown. As Mr. Brown also mentioned, since 2013, covered California rates in the individual and small group market have been subject to a full-fledged rate review, and covered California rates have never been found unreasonable or unjustified. Covered California, like CalPERS, is a sophisticated purchaser and negotiates on behalf of about 1.4 million lives, which is roughly the same as CalPERS. AB 731 will not impact CalPERS rate-setting authority and will simply look at the underlying methodologies of how rates are set, which could bring greater transparency of the entire market, and we hope allow CalPERS to actually negotiate an even better deal for your members. For these reasons, we respectfully request that the CalPERS board, votes to support AB 731. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, Mr. President, members. Mario Yedidia from Unite Here, the Hotel, Casino, and Food Service Workers Union, here to ask for your support on this matter. Our members are in labor management trust funds and also in collectively bargained healthcare agreements that large employers buy. Look, in a place like Nevada, where our union buys healthcare for 250,000 people in Las Vegas, we have the market power and the ability to negotiate our rates directly with providers. We believe in that face-to-face. We know that across-the-table negotiation that Ms. Green-Ross, you were talking about, that's the world that we live in. That's how we negotiate our healthcare rates. This bill does not threaten either CalPERS' ability to do that. All it does is provide 10 million Californians in the large group market with some semblance of bargaining power against Kaiser. Has 8 million covered lives, $21 billion in cash reserves. When we're buying healthcare for 30,000 hotel workers in San Francisco, we have no bargaining power against that. The methodology review, is something that, again, respects CalPERS' ability and all contract holders, as Ms. Flox mentioned, ability to negotiate face-to-face with your insurance providers, your HMO providers, and we respectfully request your full support of this bill. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, so now we will move to item 9B, but we want to first get the board's independent counsel on the phone, Mr. Sharad Shah. Is he on? And before I call, you there, Mr. Shah?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
good.
I am. Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board.
Thank you. Before I call on Ms. Taylor for 9B and 9C, yeah, we did. We want to, Mr. Shah has a couple of comments. Mr. Shah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Very quickly, I just want to inform board members that that we I want to note, I know board members already know this, that we received late submitted arguments by the members at agenda items 9B4 and 9C2. I have reviewed the arguments carefully, and they do not change my recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shah. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you. So then I move to adopt the proposed decisions at agenda items 9B1 through 23 with the minor modifications argued by staff. And I move...
No, just a minute. Let's take a...
You want to vote on this one?
Yeah, let's vote on that one first. So it's moved by Ms. Taylor, second by Mr. Miller. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the item passes. Okay, Ms. Taylor.
Thanks. So I also move to deny the petitions for reconsideration at agenda items 9C1 through 9C3.
Moved by Ms. Taylor, second by Mr. Miller. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the item passes. Thank you, Ms. Taylor, and thank you, Mr. Shah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we've got time. We will now move to information agenda items 10A. Stakeholders report. Mr. Pacheco and Mr. Fox.
Good morning, Mr. President and members of the board. Brad Pacheco, CalPERS team. As Ms. Frost mentioned in her CEO report, we do have the results of our annual stakeholder perception survey. So this may be new to some of you. We do this survey once a year, and this includes our stakeholders, our active and retired members, our employers, and the stakeholders that you have seen come before you today during public comment. Joining me is the Division Chief of Stakeholder Relations, Kelly Fox, and to my left is David Takeharts. He's our Stakeholder Relations Manager, and I'll turn that over to them.
Thank you, Brad. Kelly Fox, Division Chief of Stakeholder Relations, CalPERS team member. So the presentation you'll get today, we'll go through this as quickly as you need to. If there are questions, please feel free to inject those questions as we go through this. I'm going to turn it over to David, who's going to make the presentation. He is really kind of the architect behind the survey itself, as well as a couple team members we want to acknowledge in the audience, Josh Robinson, Jamie Pope, if they would stand real quick for... They worked on this as well, so it's a product of this team here at Stakeholder Relations. So I'll turn it over to David. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. David Takeharts, CalPERS team member. So this is the summary of the annual Stakeholder Perception Survey. As the name denotes, it takes a sample of the stakeholder population, which for us, we break up into 6 different cohorts. I just want to note that this is not just a survey that rates the effectiveness of the communications and stakeholder relations function of CalPERS, but really the whole enterprise as far as it extends to external audiences. So just want to make sure that all the areas in CalPERS are recognized for their efforts that they contribute to the members, employers, and stakeholders of the system. I'm going to move through the slides here. So here are the different cohorts that we separate out when we do the stakeholder survey. We have active members, and we have relatively similar population sizes between public agency employees, state employees, and school employees. We have retirees, employer executives, which are really that kind of like top 4 or 5 executives at the different agencies. They go by different titles, whether that's city manager or CFO or director of finance, but sort of like that C-suite of the employer group. We also sample the inactive members, so folks who have some service credit with the system but are no longer currently employed by a CalPERS covered employer. And then we have employers all levels. So these are folks who sign up to receive our employer bulletins, our employer circular letters. Most often, these are the folks who are out there in the employer community who do the day-to-day transactional business with CalPERS, the people who really have their fingers on the keyboards and are interacting with us through My CalPERS, or they're working with our actuaries or with our health team, really more of that level, although it can include folks from the higher levels as well. And then the sixth category we've labeled here as stakeholder leaders. Those are the folks, many of whom come and speak in public testimony to this board and the various committees. So these are the individuals who are either the executive director or the legislative advocate, or in some other sense the representative of larger groups that represent clusters of members, retirees, employers, industry partners at the state and national level, things of that nature. So a much, much smaller cohort of people who many of you would know them by face or by name if you saw them. You can see there the response rate. So we sent out approximately 107,000 surveys last year. These are all online surveys. We do not do interviews. They're very similarly worded, just slight kind of like syntactical changes in the questions to modify it to employer versus member and the like, but they're very similar. And it's 34 questions long. It takes less than 4 minutes on average for folks to complete. The survey structure, you can see we have 8 long-term trend questions, so named because they're simple yes-no questions that we have data on going back quite a ways from much previous iterations on this survey. We have 8 perception survey questions, which are more on a Likert scale, which is that common strongly agree versus strongly disagree, neutral, etc. We have 1 question on their overall perception, and then we have a lot of open-ended questions where they can give us their thoughts in extended form, and then demographic questions so we can kind of suss out, okay, by where they live in California, or if they don't live in the state, how close are they to retirement, or how long have they been retired, just trying to kind of tease out some more information that can be useful to us as we try to gear our outreach, communication, and customer service efforts in the best way possible. Quick note here on what was going on during the survey period. So the time period here was February 2018 through May of 2019, so a little bit over a year. So if you'll recall, during that time period, we had a change in state administration, but in terms of CalPERS major policies, we didn't have those sort of like sea changes that we had had in the years prior. This is well after the decisions that resulted from the asset liability management process. So things like the discount rate change, the shortened amortization policy, asset allocation, those things had all occurred really over a year before that and had been well established and pretty well understood by the community. So it was a fairly calm period. We did have the ongoing robust discussions of the various private equity models. On the healthcare side, we did have a little bit more action for these groups in terms of the reduction in the health regions and the elimination of risk adjustment. And throughout this whole period, on the outreach and communication side, just an enormous amount of effort to stakeholders of all these cohorts on pension costs and their options and what's available to them in terms of addressing their unfunded liabilities through prepayment of those costs. So that was a major theme to all of these groups during the time period. So, at a high level, the general perception of CalPERS remains positive across all of these groups. 86% of people, when asked a simple binary yes or no question, the average response was yes 86% of the time, and that's the average of the whole. So I think that's in general quite favorable. Last year, the response was 82.2% yes, so we're seeing a solid uptick there over a year-to-year basis. Here's some of the key findings, and for these, I'd like to pause for a moment and acknowledge our policy and data analytics area who performed this analysis for us. So stakeholder relations administers the survey, but a different area of the organization performs the analysis, so we have that objectivity between us. So I don't just score myself very, very high and say, congratulations, me. High customer service scores continue to be the strongest correlator to scores that are high across the board. So this has been our consistent finding for the last couple of years, is that the person who thinks that our customer service is being managed well also tends to think that we're good at almost everything else, from ethical operation to being a good healthcare policy advocate, and really everything else. The person who has that positive feeling about how the customer service is being managed tends to think that we're doing swell across the board. So I think that's well worth noting. Again, the long-term trend questions, that yes, no, very high percentage will say yes. Our two highest rating cohorts across the board are definitely retirees and those stakeholders. We get a lot of contact with these folks. Obviously, the retirees are drawing their pension benefits, so that probably adds to the equation of satisfaction as well. The employer executives, that C level of the employer community, has for the last few years been consistently our lowest rated cohort. This is unsurprising, as these are the folks who are really looking at their budgets for their municipalities, for their districts, and seeing rising CalPERS costs, and they feel the pressures from their constituents on that. So it's not necessarily a low score. As you can see, it's 5.58, which is somewhere between, they somewhat agree that we're doing a good job across the board, but they're just under significant pressures in terms of the costs that are necessary to fund the benefits. And notably, as Marcy Frost mentioned in her CEO comments, we did see a really significant increase in overall confidence in retirement money being safe across all the sectors. So that was positive to see. Kind of diving in a little bit here. So here we're looking at the trend of member scores. And just for convenience, I've lumped in active members and retired members here. That's what we're looking at here, the true core membership, active and retirees. You can see that everything is trending upwards. The blue column on the right of each of the clusters is the most recent data. For employers, again, just for convenience, I've lumped together the employer kind of leaders and the folks who respond to the employer bulletins and get our circulars. Again, a general upward trend across all the metrics. I would kind of direct your attention to the third column in from the left, or the third cluster of columns in from the left. That's the question about, are you confident in your retirement money being safe? And you can see a really big uptick there from a very sharp decline the year before. Okay, so we are moving the needle on what had been a concerning drop. That was actually, if you can kind of look at the background lines, it had actually more employers last year had said that they weren't confident in retirement money than had said yes. So we're back in positive territory there, so that's very encouraging. For the stakeholder leaders, so again, these are the 85 or so individual people who have a ton of skin in the game, represent a lot of members, employers, retirees, or otherwise are players in national or state politics as relates to pensions, healthcare, and investments. You can see the scores here. Again, generally very favorable. I'm sure your eyes are drawn right to those glaring red arrows. I would just note there that on those two questions, especially is CalPERS doing a good job of keeping in touch with members and keeping them informed, while we did decrease from last year 90% of people said yes to that. Very rare to get 90% of any Americans to agree on literally anything. So I would submit to this board that last year was the bit of the outlier there, that it was I was happy to see 90% of people think that we're doing a good job keeping in touch with their members, but wasn't surprised to see it dip a little this year. And we're still on track for our overall trend, as this metric is attached to several business initiatives. here's our commitment to stakeholders. These are part of our message to stakeholders, specifically like on the stakeholder team, and when the executives and leadership are out talking to folks, regardless of who they represent, this is really our message to them. It includes, we want to give you access to our leadership, one message to all stakeholder groups, and again, that continued focus on customer service, because we know that's really the bedrock upon which all the other things are built. Lastly, we have some opportunities and action steps that the team here has agreed upon. This is what we see as areas of focus going forward. So continued communication and messaging on what we're doing to shore up the fund and to ensure the long-term sustainability of this system. Focused effort on investment returns, the importance of private equity as the projected highest returning asset class, and what that means to the fund, and what it means to employers in terms of potentially keeping those costs under control. Continuing to clarify the roles of the administration in terms of who in the system has control or access to which levers. There continues to be some confusion about what CalPERS has the ability to do in terms of benefit design and costs, so we're always out there just clearing up the air on that. We want to continue CalPERS leadership participation, so Marcy has done dozens of meetings in the last year. We want to continue that and have more executive participation in that. And then lastly, the important continued emphasis on unfunded liabilities and what the employers can do to address that in advance. And then lastly, the focus on elected officials. So you'll notice that we don't survey currently city council members or mayors or school board members. So we're going to look to enhance that, because they are key players in this equation too at the municipal and local level. So that completes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. We do have a question. Mr. Miller?
Yeah, I had a couple questions, like on page 8 and 9, and on the question, is CalPERS being managed well? It looks like that's a pretty clear adverse trend, especially in the more recent, and so I guess also with page 9 on the customer service, even though there's less data points. And so I'm curious what we're doing to kind of drill down and determine what were the drivers, what were the factors, and what are we doing to determine what was driving that, if anything. Again, with small response rates and sample sizes, it can be tough, but just what are the steps we're doing to follow up to see what we can do to start turning some of that around?
Thank you for your question. So just real quick to address your initial point, there are less data points on this. Prior to 2017, we interviewed these folks via phone interviews, so we really had more qualitative data on that. Starting in 2017, we transferred over to doing them, and so that's where we started getting the data in the same format. Certainly, I think that it is a small stakeholder group. It is a small response group. So we had a total of 18 responses. With that small of a data set, not knowing exactly which groups or folks that represent the different sectors responded, it can be difficult. Again, so we have employers, retirees, and members. That's definitely the bulk of this group. But we also have groups like representatives from NASRA, NCPERS, other very large pension funds to kind of round out the opinion making on this. And so it can be a challenge to know what it is that they feel we weren't sensitive to the needs of their stakeholders on. Personally, so judging by the open-ended comments, I got a little bit more insight into that. There was a feel from some members that they weren't getting information fast enough. That was one thing that came out. So we really have put a paramount importance now on as soon as information is releasable, as long as there's not a clear and very, very compelling reason not to, we want to get that information out so that stakeholders can process that and do what they need to do in order to feel that their voice is being heard at the appropriate time by the appropriate folks.
Wait. I messed it up. Sorry. On page 8, the column 1, same question. That's one actually I was a little more concerned about. So,
say that one more time, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, page 8, column 1. Is CalPERS being managed well? And that's the one I'm more interested in what we're doing to see what's going on with what is an overall adverse trend, and especially in the last 4 or 5 columns there that are the more recent. So it's the same thing, what are we doing to drill down, and are there any initial indicators, or what are the factors that contributed to that?
I'll jump in on that. So one of the things that we've done is bring the executives out with us. And in fact, many of the meetings we've had, the CEO has been there to talk about how we are managing CalPERS. And the questions vary from, what are you doing to improve the funded status, to what are you doing administratively. And those are the things that we've done, and we're trying to focus on is getting our executives. I think David mentioned earlier, we're trying to get, whenever we have these invitations to go to associations and a varied number of associations, we're trying to get an executive. If we can get the CEO to go to these meetings, given her busy schedule, we try to make that happen, or we find a surrogate. And a lot of time, I think Michael Cohen's been out with us, and some of the actuarial team members as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Ms. Middleton?
Okay. I think these are more comments rather than questions, but from my experience in talking with numerous individuals in the local government community, the primary concerns is the escalating cost arc and the predictability of what those costs are going to be. To the extent that we are doing a better job, and I believe we are, in identifying what the cost arc will be in the future and making our costs more predictable, we are, I believe, going to be very successful. Mr. Fox and I had a meeting recently in the city of Brea, and a council member who was extremely concerned about the cost that we had, but a statement that I think almost every elected official can relate to, his statement: if I know what the costs are going to be, whether I like them or not, I can figure out how to get to that number, but I have to know. To the extent that we are getting out and interacting, we are achieving success. Ms. Frost spoke of her meeting with the Riverside County officials. Mm-hmm. There was great skepticism on the part of the individuals from Riverside County at the start of that meeting. By the conclusion of that meeting, we had individuals who had changed significantly in their level of concern, and that came back, frankly, to Ms. Frost and how strongly she presented that she and the team at CalPERS have a plan for dealing with the issues and have the capacity to carry out that plan. And I think those are things that we need to continue to emphasize. And I cannot say how important it is that we demonstrate to the employer community that not only is the plan in place, the team is in place with the capacity to carry out those plans. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, Ms. Middleton. I just wanted to add to Mr. Miller's question. I do see an opportunity for us to even drill down further on these questions with the annual stakeholder forum that you just approved, or forums. So we'll certainly look at that.
Okay, thank you for the report. And we are at a break period for our recorders, so we're going to take a 10-minute break. So let's come back at 11:18, I'm sorry.